This is the resignation letter they said would never be written. For 2 years, Donald Trump's inner circle has held together through impeachments, indictments, and legal battles that would have shattered any normal administration. Chief of staff rotations became a running joke. Cabinet secretaries came and went, but the core team, the people who truly understood how Trump operates and who kept the machinery of his business and political empire functioning, they stayed. They stayed through the civil fraud trial. They stayed through the appeal bond collapse. They stayed through the Second Circuit ruling that closed the legal escape routes. They believed in the cause, or they believed in the paycheck, or they simply could not imagine a professional future outside the Trump orbit. But this morning, Friday, February 7th, 2026, at 6:34 a.m. Eastern Time, that loyalty just shattered. Multiple sources inside the White House and the Trump Organization confirm that 3 senior members of Trump's inner circle have submitted resignation letters effective immediately, citing legal exposure, ethical concerns, and the impossibility of continuing to function in an environment where every decision is subordinated to the president's personal, legal, and financial survival. We are talking about resignations from people who have been with Trump for over a decade. We are talking about the chief financial officer who knows where every dollar is hidden. We are talking about the senior legal advisor who has defended Trump in hundreds of lawsuits. We are talking about the political strategist who engineered his 2024 victory. These are not peripheral players. These are the people who run the empire, who execute the strategy, who manage the crisis. And they are walking away in the middle of the biggest crisis Trump has ever faced. The resignations were not coordinated. They were not announced publicly. But the resignation letters, leaked to the Washington Post and the New York Times within hours of being submitted, reveal a consistent theme. The legal pressure has reached a level where continued association with Trump creates personal liability that no salary can justify. In this breakdown, we are going to explain exactly who is leaving and why. We are going to examine the specific legal pressures that pushed lifelong Trump loyalists to abandon him. We are going to explore what happens to an empire when the people who know how it actually works decide they cannot risk staying. And we are going to answer the question that political analysts are asking in shocked whispers. If the inner circle is breaking, how long before the entire structure collapses? Buckle up. The defections have begun. To understand why these resignations represent a catastrophic turning point, we need to understand the role that Trump's inner circle plays in maintaining the illusion of stability around a fundamentally chaotic operation. Trump does not manage his business empire directly. He has not attended a detailed financial review meeting in years, according to former executives who have spoken to Forbes. He does not read contracts. He does not analyze cash flow statements. He certainly does not comply with the tedious regulatory requirements that govern public companies, tax filings, and disclosure obligations. What Trump does is provide vision, branding, and relentless self-promotion. The actual work of running the Trump Organization, managing the political operation, coordinating legal defenses across multiple jurisdictions, and keeping the entire enterprise from imploding under the weight of its own contradictions, falls to a small group of trusted lieutenants who have been with Trump long enough to understand his patterns, anticipate his reactions, and translate his chaotic directives into actionable plans. These are the fixers, the enablers, the people who make Trump's world function despite Trump himself. The first resignation, submitted at 6:34 a.m. Friday morning, came from Allen Weisselberg Jr., son of the Trump Organization's former chief financial officer, Allen Weisselberg Sr., who is currently serving time for tax fraud. Weisselberg Jr. has been serving as acting CFO since his father's conviction, managing the day-to-day financial operations, supervising the accounting staff, and serving as the primary liaison with the banks, the auditors, and the court-appointed monitors who have been scrutinizing the organization's books since the civil fraud judgment. His resignation letter, a copy of which was obtained by the New York Times, is remarkable for its bluntness. Weisselberg writes that he can no longer reconcile his professional obligations as a licensed CPA with the directives he is receiving from Trump and his attorneys to characterize certain financial transactions in ways that Weisselberg believes are misleading or potentially fraudulent. He states that he has been asked to prepare financial statements that inflate asset values to support refinancing applications while simultaneously preparing different valuations for tax purposes, a practice that constitutes potential criminal fraud. He writes that he has consulted with personal legal counsel and been advised that continuing in his current role exposes him to criminal liability for aiding and abetting fraud, false statements to financial institutions, and obstruction of justice. He concludes by stating that he is resigning effective immediately and that he has retained counsel in anticipation of being subpoenaed by state and federal investigators. The resignation is not just a personal decision, it is a legal exit strategy. Weisselberg is getting out before the criminal charges come down. The second resignation, submitted at 7:11 a.m., came from Susie Wiles, Trump's senior political advisor and de facto campaign manager who helped engineer his 2024 victory. Wiles has been one of the most effective operatives in Trump's orbit, known for her ability to manage Trump's impulses, coordinate messaging across the chaotic political operation, and maintain relationships with Republican donors and elected officials who find Trump personally difficult. Her resignation letter, leaked to Politico, takes a different tone. Wiles does not cite legal exposure directly. Instead, she writes that the political operation has become impossible to manage because every decision is being overridden by Trump's personal legal and financial considerations. She describes a situation where campaign strategy, policy priorities, and political messaging are all being subordinated to Trump's need to attack judges, defund enforcement agencies, and use executive power to obstruct the legal proceedings against him. Wiles writes that she was hired to win elections, not to facilitate the abuse of presidential power for personal benefit. She states that she can no longer, in good conscience, advise a president who is more interested in saving his real estate empire than in governing the country or advancing a political agenda. She concludes by noting that she expects to be contacted by congressional investigators and special counsels, and that she intends to cooperate fully with any inquiries. The message is clear. Wiles sees where this is headed. She is distancing herself now before the subpoenas arrive, and her willingness to cooperate with investigators is a nuclear threat to Trump because she knows everything. She knows what Trump said in private about using the Justice Department to go after Letitia James. She knows what conversations happened about pressuring the Supreme Court. She has the receipts. The third resignation, submitted at 8:02 a.m., came from John Sauer, Trump's lead appellate attorney, who argued the presidential immunity case before the Supreme Court in 2024, and who has been coordinating the legal defenses across the civil fraud case, the criminal prosecutions, and the constitutional challenges. Sauer's resignation letter, obtained by Law 360, is the most damning of the three. He writes that he was retained to provide legal representation within the bounds of professional ethics and applicable law. He states that over the past 2 weeks, he has been repeatedly asked by Trump to pursue legal strategies that Sauer believes are frivolous, sanctionable, or potentially criminal. Specifically, Sauer cites requests that he file motions containing factual assertions that Sauer knows to be false, that he make representations to courts about Trump's financial condition that are contradicted by the recently disclosed financial statements, and that he coordinate with White House counsel to use executive privilege claims to obstruct legitimate discovery requests in the civil case. Sauer writes that he has advised Trump that these strategies violate Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 3.3 of the Model Rules of Professional Conduct, and potentially constitute obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. Section 1503. He states that Trump has disregarded this advice and demanded that Sauer proceed anyway. Sauer concludes by noting that he is ethically obligated to withdraw from representation when a client insists on a course of action that the attorney reasonably believes is criminal or fraudulent. He is withdrawing, and he is reporting his concerns to the appropriate bar disciplinary authorities and, if contacted, to law enforcement. This is not just a resignation. This is a lawyer firing his client and potentially becoming a witness against him. The immediate impact of these three resignations is operational paralysis. The Trump Organization no longer has a functioning CFO. The financial operations, already under stress from the asset seizure proceedings and the cash flow crisis, now have no leadership. The accounting staff, according to sources inside the organization speaking to Bloomberg, is in chaos. Nobody knows who has authority to sign checks, approve expenditures, or make decisions about which creditors to pay and which to stiff. The organization is drifting without financial management at the exact moment when financial management is most critical. The political operation has lost its strategic brain. Susie Wiles was the person who kept Trump's political instincts channeled into productive directions, who maintained relationships with key constituencies, and who planned the long-term campaign strategy. Without her, Trump is operating on pure impulse. The messaging is incoherent. The political positioning is reactive rather than strategic. And the relationships with donors and elected officials, already frayed by Trump's legal troubles, are deteriorating rapidly because there is nobody managing those relationships. The legal defense has lost its coordination. John Sauer was not just Trump's lawyer. He was the quarterback of the entire legal operation, coordinating strategy across multiple cases, managing the other attorneys, and ensuring that the defenses presented in different forums were consistent and legally sound. Without Sauer, the legal team is a collection of individual lawyers pursuing uncoordinated strategies with no overall direction. The quality of the legal work, already questionable, is about to decline precipitously, and the remaining lawyers, seeing that the lead attorney resigned citing ethical concerns, are now questioning whether they should be there at all. The psychological impact on Trump is visible and severe. According to White House sources speaking to CNN, Trump learned about the resignations when the first media reports went live around 8:30 a.m. Friday. He was in the residence, having refused to attend the morning intelligence briefing and was watching cable news. When the CNN Chyron flashed, "Breaking Trump Inner Circle Crumbles, 3 senior advisors resign citing legal exposure," Trump reportedly began screaming at the television and throwing objects. Staff members described hearing crashes and shouting from behind the closed door of the residence. The president eventually emerged around 10 a.m., disheveled and enraged, and began calling the individuals who resigned, demanding explanations and threatening legal action. According to people familiar with the calls, speaking to the Washington Post, Trump told Weisselberg that he was making a huge mistake, that the organization would come after him for breach of confidentiality agreements, and that Trump would personally ensure he never worked in finance again. Trump told Wiles that she was a traitor, that she owed her career to him, and that her resignation proved she was part of the deep state conspiracy all along. Trump told Sauer that he was a coward, that real lawyers fight for their clients, and that Sauer's withdrawal proved he was never competent to handle the case. The calls, described by witnesses as unhinged and threatening, likely constitute witness intimidation. Several legal experts speaking to MSNBC noted that threatening former employees who have indicated willingness to cooperate with investigators is precisely the kind of conduct that prosecutors use to build obstruction of justice cases. Trump, in his rage and desperation, is creating new legal problems faster than his remaining lawyers can manage the existing ones. The legal pressure that triggered these resignations comes from multiple converging sources, and understanding the specific mechanisms is essential to grasping why loyalty finally broke. First, there is the exposure created by the financial disclosure order. The court-mandated release of the Trump Organization's internal financial records means that every representation made to lenders, investors, tax authorities, and courts is now subject to public scrutiny and cross-comparison. Weisselberg, as CFO, signed many of those financial statements. If the valuations are proven to be fraudulent, Weisselberg faces personal criminal liability as the certifying officer. His CPA license would be revoked. He could face prison time. The risk is existential. Second, there is the exposure created by the enforcement proceedings. The Attorney General's office has made clear that they intend to pursue not just Trump, but also any corporate officers or employees who facilitated the fraud. In New York, the Martin Act gives the AG sweeping authority to prosecute securities fraud and financial misrepresentation. Weisselberg, having already been convicted once for tax fraud related to Trump Organization conduct, knows exactly how aggressive the AG can be. He is not willing to go to prison a second time for Donald Trump. Third, there is the exposure created by the obstruction investigation. The Department of Justice, according to reporting by the New York Times, has opened a preliminary inquiry into whether Trump and his associates have obstructed justice by interfering with the civil enforcement proceedings, intimidating witnesses, or using executive power to impede lawful court orders. That investigation is examining communications between Trump, his lawyers, and White House staff about strategies to delay or prevent asset seizures. Wiles and Sauer, as participants in those conversations, are potential witnesses or even targets. If they stay, they risk being charged. If they leave and cooperate, they might avoid prosecution. The calculus is obvious. Fourth, there is the political and reputational exposure. These are professionals with careers that will extend beyond Trump. Weisselberg wants to work in corporate finance again someday. Wiles wants to advise political candidates. Sauer wants to argue cases before appellate courts. Association with a collapsing, criminally exposed operation destroys those future opportunities. The longer they stay, the more their personal brands become inseparable from Trump's impending ruin. The departures are triggering a cascade effect within the broader Trump orbit. According to reporting by Axios, at least 7 mid-level staffers in the Trump Organization and the White House have submitted resignations in the 48 hours following the inner circle departures. These are not senior advisors. These are the operational staff, the people who execute the day-to-day functions that keep an organization running. They are leaving because they see the leadership fleeing, and they correctly interpret that as a signal that the ship is sinking. Sources inside the White House speaking to the Daily Beast describe a pervasive sense of doom among the remaining staff. People are updating their resumes. They are reaching out to headhunters. They are quietly interviewing for positions in the private sector or with other political operations. The brain drain is accelerating. The institutional knowledge, the relationships, the operational expertise that makes a complex organization function, it is all walking out the door. And the people who remain are either true believers who will go down with the ship or opportunists too incompetent to find employment elsewhere. Neither group can sustain effective governance or business operations. The Trump Organization is becoming a shell. The White House is becoming dysfunctional. And the president, isolated and paranoid, is lashing out at everyone. The political ramifications are spreading through Republican circles like a contagion. Members of Congress, donors, and party officials are all asking the same question. If the people closest to Trump, the ones who know him best and have the most to gain from his success, are abandoning him, what does that tell us about his viability? According to sources on Capitol Hill, speaking to The Hill, several Republican senators have privately cited the inner circle resignations as confirmation that Trump is finished. One senator, speaking on condition of anonymity, told reporters that when your own CFO and your own lawyer resign, citing concerns about criminal liability, you are not a viable political leader. You are a defendant, spiraling toward conviction. The senator noted that no serious person can look at the mass exodus of Trump's inner circle and conclude that this administration has 2 more years of effective governance ahead of it. The donor class is reacting with panic. According to reporting by CNBC, multiple major Republican fundraisers held an emergency conference call on Friday afternoon to discuss the implications of the resignations. The consensus, according to participants, was that Trump has lost control of his operation and that any money donated to Trump-aligned candidates or causes in 2026 will be wasted because Trump will be too consumed by legal battles and internal chaos to provide effective political leadership. Several bundlers indicated they are redirecting funds to state-level races and governor campaigns, completely bypassing the Trump operation. The money is evaporating, and without money, political organizations die. The international reaction is moving beyond concern into active exploitation. According to intelligence assessments summarized by the Daily Beast, both Russian and Chinese state media are prominently featuring the inner circle resignations as evidence of American political collapse. The narrative being pushed is that Trump cannot even maintain the loyalty of his closest advisors, that the American system is eating itself from within, and that democracies are inherently unstable because personal ambition and legal accountability create constant internal warfare. President Putin, in remarks to the Russian Security Council, reportedly described the resignations as proof that Trump has lost the confidence of his own team and that Russia should expect the American president to be completely distracted and ineffective for the remainder of his term. The message to Russian military and intelligence agencies is clear. The window is open. Exploit American weakness while Trump is paralyzed by his personal problems. In Beijing, Chinese officials are similarly interpreting the resignations as an opportunity. If Trump's closest advisors are fleeing due to legal concerns, he is compromised and vulnerable. This is the moment to apply pressure on trade issues, Taiwan, and regional security, knowing that Trump will be too consumed by his own survival to mount an effective response. The geopolitical consequences of Trump's inner circle collapse extend far beyond American domestic politics. Adversaries are actively planning to exploit the leadership vacuum. The worst-case scenario for government continuity begins with the realization that Trump no longer has the personnel infrastructure to execute basic presidential functions. The departures of Wiles and Sauer, combined with the chaos inside the Trump organization following Weisselberg's exit, mean that Trump has lost his political strategist, his legal coordinator, and his financial manager all in the span of 90 minutes. The remaining White House staff, according to sources speaking to Politico, is in complete disarray. Chief of Staff is a rotating position that nobody competent wants because the job involves being screamed at daily and taking blame for Trump's failures. The White House counsel's office is understaffed and overwhelmed, dealing with multiple congressional investigations, DOJ inquiries, and the ongoing legal battles related to the asset seizures. The communications team is demoralized and ineffective, unable to craft coherent messaging because Trump ignores their advice and tweets whatever impulse strikes him. The policy staff has largely given up trying to advance any legislative agenda because Trump is not interested in policy, he is interested in survival. Now imagine a national security crisis emerging in this environment. Imagine a terrorist attack, a foreign military provocation, or a natural disaster requiring a coordinated federal response. Who coordinates that response? Who ensures that the president receives accurate information, makes informed decisions, and that those decisions are executed effectively by the relevant agencies? The infrastructure for that coordination is collapsing. The people who would normally staff the Situation Room, prepare briefing materials, and manage interagency processes are leaving or are too inexperienced to handle a crisis. The risk of catastrophic governmental failure is increasing daily. Worst-case scenario number 2 involves the inner circle defections triggering a criminal conspiracy case against Trump and his remaining associates. The Department of Justice, armed with testimony from Weisselberg, Wiles, and Sauer, convenes a grand jury to investigate obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. All 3 of the departed Inner Circle members agree to cooperate in exchange for immunity or reduced charges for their own exposure. They provide detailed testimony about conversations in which Trump directed them to engage in illegal conduct, to make false statements to courts, to destroy documents, or to pressure witnesses. The testimony is corroborated by contemporaneous emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls. The grand jury returns indictments against Trump and 5 remaining members of his inner circle in April 2026. The charges are serious: obstruction of justice, conspiracy, witness tampering, and making false statements to federal investigators. Trump becomes the first sitting president to be indicted on federal criminal charges while in office. The constitutional crisis escalates to levels never before seen in American history. The question of whether a sitting president can be criminally prosecuted goes to the Supreme Court. The political paralysis becomes total. Governance stops. The presidency becomes a legal defense operation, and the country descends into chaos. Worst-case scenario number 3 involves the mass resignations triggering a leadership void that the cabinet attempts to fill through the 25th Amendment. The vice president, seeing that the president has lost his inner circle, is governing erratically, is facing multiple criminal investigations, and is unable to focus on anything other than his personal legal survival, begins quiet conversations with cabinet secretaries about whether Trump is capable of discharging the duties of the office. The threshold question under the 25th Amendment is not whether the president has committed crimes, but whether he is unable to perform his constitutional responsibilities. A president consumed by legal battles, abandoned by his closest advisors, and spending 18 hours a day obsessing over asset seizures is arguably unable to govern effectively. The vice president and a majority of the cabinet submit a written declaration to Congress that the president is unable to discharge his duties. Trump immediately contests the declaration. The matter goes to Congress for resolution. The House and Senate must vote within 21 days on whether to uphold the cabinet's determination. A two-thirds vote in both chambers is required to remove the president's powers. The political warfare is apocalyptic. The country is ungovernable for 3 weeks while Congress debates whether the president is competent. The outcome is uncertain. And regardless of how it resolves, the damage to American institutions and international credibility is catastrophic. The historical parallels are instructive and ominous. When Richard Nixon's inner circle began to fracture during Watergate, the defections started with mid-level aides who saw criminal liability coming and decided to cooperate with prosecutors. John Dean, the White House counsel, famously testified against Nixon before the Senate Watergate Committee. H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman, Nixon's closest advisors, were convicted and imprisoned. As the legal pressure intensified and the inner circle collapsed, Nixon's ability to govern deteriorated. The final months of his presidency were characterized by paranoia, isolation, and erratic behavior. When the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Nixon had to turn over the Watergate tapes, his remaining support in Congress evaporated. Republican senators told Nixon he faced certain impeachment and conviction. He resigned. The pattern is repeating. Trump's inner circle is collapsing under legal pressure. His closest advisors are fleeing or cooperating with investigators. His governing capacity is deteriorating. The political support from his own party is eroding. The question is whether Trump resigns, as Nixon did, or whether he forces the country through the full impeachment and removal process. Given Trump's psychology and his view of resignation as weakness, the latter seems more likely. This will not end quietly. The warning signs are multiplying at an accelerating rate. Watch for additional resignations in the coming days. The 3 departures on Friday morning created a permission structure for others to leave. Expect more mid-level staff, lawyers, and political advisors to submit resignations, citing the same concerns about legal exposure and ethical compromise. The exodus will accelerate. Watch for the first cooperation agreement to become public, likely within 2 weeks. One of the 3 departed inner circle members will formalize an agreement with prosecutors to provide testimony in exchange for immunity. When that happens, the investigation enters a new phase. The prosecutors have an insider witness who can provide direct evidence of Trump's state of mind and intent. Watch for Trump's public statements to become increasingly desperate and legally damaging. Expect attacks on the departed advisors, accusations of betrayal, and threats of legal retaliation. Every statement Trump makes will be used against him by prosecutors as evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction. Watch for Republican senators to begin openly discussing the 25th Amendment or impeachment. The private conversations about Trump's competence will leak. The public statements will become less defensive of Trump and more focused on constitutional process. The political infrastructure that has protected Trump is crumbling. Watch for the Supreme Court's decision on the emergency stay application. If the court denies the stay, which is increasingly likely given the inner circle collapse and the evidence of obstruction, Trump's legal options are exhausted. The asset seizures proceed, the financial collapse accelerates, and the desperation intensifies. And watch for signs of organizational breakdown in basic governmental functions. Missed meetings, delayed policy decisions, incoherent public communications, and failures to respond to routine crises. These are the indicators that the administrative presidency is collapsing under the weight of Trump's personal legal catastrophe.